Hello, everyone. This is Daniel DeFay with Cloudify Legal, and I've got David Stelzl with me here today. He's an author and cybersecurity expert. Hi, David. How are you?
Dan, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me today.
Excellent. Well, we'll go ahead and get this interview started. I know you've got you're pressed for time. So I want to start off by just finding out a little bit more about how you got into cybersecurity and how you got interested in it.
Okay. Okay. So I've actually been involved in security quite a while, and it actually happened by accident, which is interesting because it's turned out to be a really big deal now. But back in the 90s, I was doing, I've been involved in kind of the consulting side of the technology business, networking and stuff like that. And I had an opportunity to do a startup with a company down in the Southeast, and we were just working on networks and servers and that kind of thing. And one of the guys that was in our group, he was a new hire out of the university, and he was fresh into business. And he came up to me and he said, I really think we should be in the security business. And I was like, well, what exactly does that mean? And he said, well, everybody's going to get on the internet, and this is 1994, 95 timeframe. That's when people were just getting on to the internet and thinking about using it for business. And there's a lot of people out there saying, this will never really be a business tool. But this guy was like, no, it's going to be a business tool, and it's going to require a lot of security. He was explaining what all that meant, and it was foreign to me, but we started looking into it. And sure enough, we started working on security, and the need just started growing. People were interested in it. And, I just kind of totally went into the security world at that point and been in it ever since.
Wow, 1995. That was when I built my first computer, which was Windows 95. Yeah, so that's great. I've read 3 of your books, all really, well written, and I've learned a lot from some of your teachings. So when you look around the world at businesses and government, where do you think all of this is heading? And, is it becoming too dangerous to be on the internet?
Well, it certainly is dangerous. So I definitely want to say that. On one hand, it's one of those things that's not really stoppable. I mean, the internet is what it is. And unfortunately, I think the mistake is the internet was created in an anonymous kind of way. So, people can do stuff on the internet that you can't do, say, in the voice world or other kinds of systems where you can get away with stuff and not be noticed. But at the same time, there are so many benefits. And if you look at where the world is right now, I mean, the digital revolution, I mean, we are here. It's not the industrial, it's the digital. And it's getting more and more digital. It just is going to be. So where are we headed? It's hard to really answer that question. There's a lot more danger. And I don't think we've even begun to see some of the disasters that can happen because of the wide openness of it. But at the same time, there is a lot of work being done, I think, to change the way security is being handled. And I'm sure we'll get a little bit more into that as we get into our conversation here today, because people are starting to realize we need a different approach to securing stuff because we're going to use this. We just are.
Right, absolutely. So how many small businesses and law firms are targets now? Our observation is that the small businesses, the risk is increasing, but they're not doing as much about it. So what's your opinion on that?
Well, I definitely think that small business is a key target for hackers, cybercrime, and that sort of thing. I think maybe part of the problem is that, when you go to the newspaper, they're not going to write about this like dentist office or this law firm or this, whoever got hacked, because it's not big news to the newspaper, to the media. You're going to read about the Sonys, the Targets, the TJ Maxxes, the Home Depots, the big banks that get hit, because that's big news. But the truth is, there's far more activity in the smaller businesses, because what hackers want is easier to get in the small business. And if I could just take one more second to clarify what I mean there, the perception is that if I go to Home Depot, they have lots of money, so I can steal lots of money. Well, the truth is, if I go to a small business, I can get the same thing that gets lots of money, and that is the credentials that allow me to take out loans and get credit. So if I can master a plan to attack a bunch of small businesses, the chances of getting caught are a lot smaller because they're not monitoring like a big bank would be, for instance. And B, they have all the credentials, and as long as they have good credit, I can go down to my bank and I can use their credentials and I can take out millions of dollars in loans and run with it, and they're stuck with it.
Absolutely. Are there certain vertical industries that you think are more at risk? You know, most of our clients are actually in the legal vertical, which has its own unique security challenges. And so what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the industry does play a big role in it, and there's there are masterminds out there on the hacker side that are constantly thinking of different industries and how we can make money with that industry. So, for instance, the manufacturer, I want to get their R&D plans and things like that because I can sell those overseas to some company. If I'm going after the financial organizations, they tend to be more secure, by the way, so it's a little more difficult, but I can steal the money, right? If I go to businesses that have just a lot of transactions and that sort of thing happening, I can do different kinds of fraud against those things. And any company that has information that I might be able to sell, and you better believe that in the law firm, when you mention that, the first thing that comes to my mind is if I'm a criminal, and you're talking about a law firm that does a lot of litigation type stuff, depending on who it is certainly not beyond normal thinking here that if I feel like I am going to possibly lose this case, or I know that I'm actually guilty, or I'm the loser in this situation, it's not out of the question at all that I would go find somebody who can hack into your system, your legal systems, and start to farm some of the data that is relevant to my case so that we can walk in there more prepared. So you better believe that's happening out there. It happens all the time, and people don't think that someone would actually do that, but they do.
Yeah, that's true. We tend to trust people a little too much, and that is what kind of leads to this kind of problem. What about ransomware? We kept reading about this a lot in the news, and then it kind of disappeared. But we're still seeing ransomware, and we're doing everything we can to detect and respond those types of threats. What are you seeing?
Well, whenever something's in the news a lot, we start to get dull hearing to it. And the media, if it's in the news too much, people get tired of it. So the media is less about reporting on what you really need to know and more about reporting on what pays. I mean, they're sponsored by commercials, right? So if I'm tired of hearing about ransomware, they're going to stop writing about ransomware. But the fact is, in fact, I just read a blurb, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal or Forbes or one of the, someone credible, said that in the last couple of years, since 2015, we've had a 2,000% increase in ransomware, and it continues to grow and will continue to grow, especially right now because you've heard the term, people out there or your listeners have heard the term AI, artificial intelligence, which is the ability for the computer to really start to learn about how to navigate through something or how to compute something or do something through observing things around itself. Well, that is the future of ransomware and other AI-driven attacks. So ransomware is not only still there, but it's growing and it's becoming more powerful, and it's an easy way to make money. And it's probably one of the two biggest areas of attack right now that I'm seeing in small business.
Yeah, same here. What about other threats? What should business leaders be concerned about going forward with other threats?
Well, there's a couple of big ones. So crypto mining is one of the big ones that's really growing right now. So that's me taking over your computers and using those to mine Bitcoin and other things out there. So, what is that? People don't necessarily have a picture of what that means. But what it does mean is that I can use my computer to run algorithms or run computations out on the internet and actually steal Bitcoin from the internet. And it takes a lot of processing power to do this. And so what hackers do is they take over tons of computers out there, usually in small business where they're not well equipped to defend against this thing. And it just takes those computers down to their knees. But it also makes you liable, because when the FBI starts to investigate some kind of big issue out there, they go to the computer that shows up as the criminal computer, right? And if that's sitting in your office, then you're probably going to be investigated. Another big one that I would point to at this moment would be, well, you've got ransomware, you've got crypto mining, and there was one other one that I did want to bring out. This is kind of interesting to me and unfortunate, but the biggest growing business on the internet today is the distribution of child pornography. And a lot of people don't realize what this means. I mean, it's horrible to read about it, but it's even more horrible when it's hosted on your system. And we certainly have found instances of this sort of thing in people's, on their servers in their company, because you better believe that the hacker, very profitable business, high demand for it out there, again, unfortunately, but you don't want to have that anywhere near you. So you're going to put that on someone else's system. And so it could be sitting in your back office. And again, the FBI is looking for that because it gets out in chat rooms and stuff like that because it's for sale. So, they weave themselves through the dark web, they locate where that is, and they come knocking on doors. And that creates huge, huge life disasters for individuals because it takes a long time to clear that sort of thing. So that's a big deal. And then one more that I want to mention, and this is one that every company right now should really be on high alert for. It's called CATO, C-A-T-O, Corporate Account Takeover. And what that means is that I hack into your email system, which is pretty easy to do, by the way, and I start sending email from you to your accounts payable people. And with a little bit of research, it's pretty easy for me to figure out who you're paying, who are your vendors. So, you've got accounts with different suppliers or whatever it is. And so I send my email in from you, from Dan, from the guy who's running the business. And it says to the accounts payable people, hey, we need to wire 10,000, 20, 30, 100,000 to supplier A. And it's in your email and it's written the way you would write it. And that's exactly what the criminal does. They study your emails first and say, okay, this is exactly how Dan phrases it. Here's how it's formatted. And I'm going to send this email to your accounts payable people, and they're going to wire money out. Now, you probably already know this, but I know a lot of your listeners don't. And that is, how long does your company have to figure out that fraudulent transfer just went out the door? And in the private world, if somebody charges something to my credit card, I've got 60 days at least to notify my bank, but 60 days minimum. So if I contact them within 60 days and tell them, hey, this charge to this company is fraudulent, they'll take it off my bill. And no questions asked, doesn't cost me a cent. But in the business world with a wire transfer, it's 24 hours. So that means that you better be monitoring every transaction every 24 hours, because as soon as that 24-hour mark hits, it's gone, and you will not recover that.
Great advice. Thanks, David. So, we've partnered with a number of technology firms that monitor data access, usage, and traffic to detect attacks and misuse. And I remember in your book, Digital Money, you talk a lot about that as an approach. When did you discover the whole detection response approach to security? And are you thinking that people are in the process of changing to that now, or what are you seeing?
So a couple of different questions there. In terms of discovering that, I was actually running an assessment team for pretty high-profile businesses, large hospitals, banks, that sort of thing, back around the 2000 timeframe. And what I was discovering is that even pretty sophisticated companies that had security teams on site and everything were putting in high-end firewalls, access control technology, dual authentication, stuff that just is now becoming affordable to smaller businesses, and they were still getting broken into fairly easily. In fact, we had, penetration test teams, and we, a high-profile company, a big company would hire us to see if we could break in, and we could always break in. In fact, I used to tell the client, you don't have to pay me to tell me if I can break in. I can tell you we can break in. If you want to see us break in, you can pay us.
Okay. Right. The question is, how long does it take?
That's it.
Right.
And in fact, there was a study done just recently where a team like that was interviewed, and they said, I think they did a study over 2,000 companies, and they said we got into every single company. 11% of them posed some difficulty, is what they said. Posed some difficulty, and I thought, see, that is the truth. So right there, I started, it was kind of an epiphany, and some smart people around me, like, when you look at your home, it's easy to break in. What is it that protects us in our home? It is the the fear of getting caught, the fear that the owner is going to be on the other side of the door, alarm's going to go off, and maybe, I don't know, maybe he's got a firearm, maybe he's got a dog that's going to eat me, but there's some detection response strategy sitting behind that thing. But is it being adopted? You know, it's complicated. So, you know, companies have tried to implement this themselves, even large companies. And, you know, there's been numerous people in the papers, big companies, that have had technology that does detect in place. But I'll tell you what, you got to have people who really know what that stuff is watching it. You can't just have IT people watching it, because it's cryptic and there may be lots of alerts coming in, and you got to be able to figure out, you know, which ones are real and which ones aren't. It's kind of like your car alarm going off. You know, it's going off all the time in some parking lot, and people are just, you know, hitting their key fob to turn it off because they assume it's not real. Well, the security guy has to be watching the screen, watching monitors, and looking at it and go, this one's real. Oh, this one's not real. And it takes a trained eye and somebody who does it all the time to know what's real and what's false alarm.
That's correct. Absolutely. What about internal threats? You know, we have a lot of things in place for most of our clients to help defend and detect external threats. But, you know, one of the things that, you know, a few of our clients have asked for is something to detect internal threats.
Yeah, that's, you know, I think that's an unfortunate story. And I think we would all like to believe that the people around us are trustworthy. And certainly a lot of times in a smaller business, you know, you might have family members, family friends, people who worked with you a long time. And the assumption is that everybody's going to be honest. But I'll tell you what, I have had a number of clients install software that monitors what they're doing on their laptops, on their workstations, only to discover that people are stealing from the company. And some studies have been done, studies that reveal, like the Wall Street Journal published a study not too long ago that said 75% of employees surveyed admitted that they steal from their company, 75%. Now, they're not all talking about digital data type stuff. Some of them are stealing stuff in the office, but they're stealing stuff. And if someone's going to steal one thing, they'll steal another thing, particularly if somebody's getting fired, passed over promotion, disagreement in the office. You know, there's a number of things that can trigger somebody to do something that they wouldn't normally do. And in the data world, it could be a pretty big thing. So, you know, I think people have, you know, tried to trust everybody, but the truth is you really need some technology in place. And, you know, my personal opinion is you shouldn't sneak that in there and then catch them. You know, it's better just to tell everybody, hey, you know, we trust everybody. We know everybody's honest, but just to make sure there's no problems, no finger pointing, and to make sure that we never charge you with anything that you didn't actually do, we monitor our stuff. And a company has a right to monitor everything that happens on their devices. So if I send an email on a corporate device, it's perfectly legal to monitor everything on that device, to read that email. So I tell companies, you know, if you really want to be secure, tell people this is our company's computer here, and we're monitoring that. We're reading the email, we're locking things down, we're watching you, et cetera, et cetera. If you want to send a personal email to one of your family members or whatever, that's fine. Do it on your phone, do it on your tablet, do it on one of your devices, and do it on your network. Don't put it on my network, and then we're clear, we're good. And that's the way it needs to be.
Yeah, I totally agree. Kind of shifting away from technology, let's talk a little bit more about the admin piece of things. And, you know, there's security policies and things like this documentation that, you know, folks can have in place. Do you think the small businesses really need all of this documentation?
Well, you know, I'm a small business owner too, and I know the headache of trying to manage a lot of bureaucracy and paperwork and stuff that nobody's ever going to use. But security policy is in place for a couple of things that are really important. And the biggest thing is it limits liability. So if something happens in your organization, for instance, let's say that somebody in your office pulls up a website that has pornographic images on it. It's not difficult for somebody standing within view of that screen to go, you know what, I'm suing. But if it says in the policy that you're not allowed to do that, then the company is clear. It's not the company's fault, it's the employee's fault, as long as they've provided training and made sure the person was told to read the policies and follow the policies. So it limits liability. The other place it limits liability is if I get hacked into and people try to sue me, which could easily happen and has happened in the past many times, then when I show up to court or our lawyers get together and start talking about it, if my policies and my procedures for security outline a clear protection, detection, and response, keep people out. If they break in, I can detect, and I've got a response plan in place. If I have that, that's what we would call a due care sort of thing. I'm sure you've heard that statement before. And the court is going to favor that. They're going to say, well, they had everything that they should have had in place. The fact that they got hacked into is, you know, it's not really their fault because they had the right stuff in place. Given the kind of data that they store and the type of business they are, this is industry standard. If it's industry standard, best practice, there's not much that that person's going to get away with in terms of a lawsuit. And that's the most you can do. So I would certainly have that in place.
Thanks, David. Yeah, and another thing where admin can get even more laborious is when you start dealing with compliance. When you start adding compliance into the mix, how should small businesses deal with compliance? You know, PCI, HIPAA, GDPR, and some of the other ones that are out there.
Yeah, so my take on compliance might be a little different than a lot of people. The population out there would like to think that the government is going to solve the security problem for them. And I really don't think that is going to happen. But what does happen is when people get hacked into, they're looking for someone to respond. And the response from the government is compliance. Now, there's a good side and a bad side to that. The good side is that there are some things that are being, maybe forced upon the business owner or whatever to do something about securing your data, so you can feel somewhat comfortable as a client of that company or whatever. The bad side is, I think in many cases, it's a false sense of security. So, we've all read government documents, and a lot of times, it's funny in the public sector. If you write like a 10-page paper, it's long. In the government, if you write a 2,000-page paper, it's normal. And so, who's actually read all that and studied all that and made sure that it actually makes sense and that it's applicable to a little business? I mean, a multi-billion-dollar size organization put together something for a 10-person company, and a lot of times it's a disconnect. So when I look at the requirements of a lot of these regulations out there, it's the law. You have to do it. I can't advise you not to be compliant, but I would advise you to think of them as two very different things. You got to have certain stuff in place, like as a homeowner or as a car owner, I need to have a registration for my vehicle. I need to have a title. I need to have inspection done at certain levels depending on the state I live in, and I need to have a driver's license and have passed my driver's test. However, if you have young people in your family who are reaching or have recently reached the driver's age, which I do, you know full well that these documents here do not make a safe driver. They just legally allow you to drive. Over here, we got the driver, right? Is this person aware? Are they watching as they go through the intersection and the guy on the other side isn't following the rules and he's going first or whatever? Does my driver just say, well, I had the right of way, so, boom. That's the way we have to think about this security thing. Get the documentation in place, but in no way does that mean that you are computing safely. That's over here. Training, technology, and awareness has to happen for me to actually safely drive this computer.
Thanks for clearing that up, David. Yeah, I agree that, compliance does not necessarily mean that a company's secure, and we try to, preach that from our side as well. In your books, you talk a lot about the need for measuring risk on a consistent basis. What's your approach, and how often do you think small firms need to do this?
So, the answer to that probably is ongoing. Risk is always present. I think that a lot of the risk assessing out there is probably approached in too much of a technical, one-size-fits-all type approach, though. So when I see companies going out and looking at risk and measuring risk, a lot of times what I do is I see a bunch of companies doing, like, we're going to scan your perimeter. We're going to scan your internal, whatever. And in fact, a lot of companies will offer that for free, an internal, external scan for free. It doesn't really mean much, though, when you look at those scans. They tell you stuff like some of your patches are out of date. You don't have antivirus running or current antivirus running on your server. You've got, ports or holes open on your internet, which are open anyway for other things like email and stuff like that. And some may create some openings for some malicious things to happen. but it's not a measurement of risk, really. So is it truly a risk analysis? So when I think about risk analysis, you know, and I actually talk about it like this in my book because I want the average person to get this. Let's forget about technology a moment and let's think about stuff that all of us do. We all go to the doctor, and as we get older, we start to get a little more concerned about certain health issues like heart disease and cancer type things and things that start to, you know, pop up when you start to get into the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and later on, right? So when I go to the doctor and I have, you know, a blood test and the physical type thing going on, I want to know, what is my risk? What's the likelihood, doctor, that I'm going to develop type 2 diabetes? Or what's the likelihood I'm going to develop heart disease or have a stroke or have a heart attack or something like that? I want to know that. And so they're checking stuff like, you know, what does your artery, you know, look like right now? And what does your cholesterol levels look like? And I don't know what all that stuff is necessarily. I mean, those I do, but they start looking at all these weird numbers and putting them together and going, you got some different factors here, and we need to, you know, change your diet, or you need more exercise, or you need, you know, whatever you need, less stress. And they start to give you kind of a, you know, a percentage, you know, you're headed for diabetes if you don't cut back on your sugar. So when I come in and I'm looking at assessing a company about risk, what I really want to know is, what does their business look like? What kind of data do they have? What do they do with that data? Who uses that data? Who creates that data? Where does it go? And what kind of uptime requirements? What has to be working and available on a moment-by-moment basis, and how much downtime could you actually afford? And, you know, there's a balance there. I mean, you know, for billions of dollars, you might have 100% uptime, but nobody can afford it. So, you know, we start looking at where the balance is. And then we can look around and we can see, are there symptoms of compromise? Are there places where people can actually get into your computers and that sort of thing easily? And what's the likelihood? Because it's small business. You know, we can't be like a space shuttle here. We got to be thinking, okay, well, I can live with some risk because I'm a small business, but how much risk? And how do we, you know, kind of put that into a package that's actually affordable for that company and addresses the big issues? And, you know, earlier I said it's detection response. The last thing I'll say about this is, if you go to your house and you think, okay, if I wanted to lock down my house and make sure no one ever came in here that wasn't invited, I'd have to kind of build a castle, and it would be really expensive. I'd have moats and alligators to feed and the whole bit, right? And it would be hard to come visit me. Like, you'd have to get an appointment, and I'd have to put my alligators away and get my drawbridge down and all that kind of stuff. But I don't do that. Instead, I've got some cameras that are monitoring my outside. I got my dogs outside. They'll eat you if you come uninvited, but I can put them away. It's pretty easy. And if you were to just break through my door, my alarm's going to go off, and we got a response plan in place. And that's pretty inexpensive. You know, I'm paying a little bit of money a month to a monitoring company, and I got my stuff installed and, you know, doing some monitoring here. And that's how we approach small business. It's a fairly simple process. Figure out where the risk is, how much you got, and then put in the detection that's going to help me reduce that risk, and put a response plan in place that's fast enough to stop before disaster strikes. And that's
all right. I like it. Thanks, David. I got about maybe 4 more questions left, so looks like we got enough time here.
Okay.
What about the cloud? You know, obviously we're Cloudify legal. We do embrace the cloud, but we try to do it in a way that keeps it secure. And we have a lot of clients that use our own private cloud. What's your thoughts on the cloud, and what should people be on the lookout for?
Yeah, well, there's definitely a lot of controversial information out there about, you know, is the cloud secure? And a lot of people have said it's not secure. And there are definitely some factors out there that I think people need to consider when they start thinking cloud. Like, for instance, where is my data, and who owns my data? And what happens if that cloud goes out of business? Then what happens? And if I leave a cloud, who deletes my data? And do they actually delete it? So there's a number of things out there. But when I look at small business, and again, I'm a small business, and my stuff is in the cloud. And here's why. Because if I tried to lock down all my own stuff, all my own servers and my email and everything, all that kind of stuff, and make it secure in my home here, in my home office, it would be expensive. And for a small business to do all that themselves, build all their own security stuff, it would cost a lot to put in all those detection tools and stuff like that. So I really do recommend that you start thinking, okay, who can scale this? And when I look at the cloud and I think about, putting my stuff in a cloud that is a reputable cloud. Okay, you said you have a private cloud. Okay, so if I trust you and you're down the street from me and I feel like you've got a good handle, a great handle on security, you're probably going to secure my data a whole lot better than I could possibly build in my own office here. And if I went to some bigger clouds, some more public clouds, if I knew that those companies were reputable companies and that there were other big companies that I am familiar with that have their data in that cloud, I got to believe that they're putting pressure on that cloud service, because I'm a small business again, right? I don't have the leverage or the utilities or even the money to go in and say, hey, I want to assess all your security at one of these big cloud providers. But I would not recommend anybody look for the low-cost provider when it comes to cloud, because there's someone who's got a cloud and it's somewhere overseas, and you got to remember, if you live in the U.S., then you're living on U.S. law. And when your data is sitting overseas in somebody else's data center, whose law governs that data?
Yep, couldn't agree more. Let's talk a little bit about BYOD, or bring your own device, and mobile smartphones and things like that. What are the big security issues that we need to look forward to on these kind of devices?
So BYOD is a bit of a hairball because they all live in our phone now, right? And there's just like, I think about my own phone. I own my own business, right? But if I went to work for somebody else and they told me that I had to carry 2 phones, I don't think I'd do it. In fact, when I used to work for a large bank, we had a pretty strict, PC format that you had to live and die by, and your computer was set up exactly like this, and it was locked down and everything. But I was in IT. And me and all my peers, not to mention any bank names here in this conversation, but we were in IT, so we built our own computers, and we didn't abide by those rules because we weren't about to be locked down like that. Well, today it's 100 times worse than that, because anybody who's coming out of school is used to living in their computer. That means that their whole social life, their dating life, their music life, their financial life, their entertainment systems, everything is in their phone, their tablet, in their laptop. So there's a couple of things that we want to mention here. If the company gives me their laptop, chances are if I got to carry that laptop around, and especially if I'm traveling, I'm going to want all that stuff on my laptop for work. And it's going to be expensive and hard to lock all that stuff down and get any millennial generation person to stay in your office and work for you if you lock them out of everything. They're going to be annoyed by that. They're going to use their phone anyway, and you're not probably going to give them 2 phones. So it's kind of like there's this fuzzy line now between what is bring your own device. Everything's kind of your own device in a way. But here's where it really gets tricky. I'm using my tablet, I'm using my phone, and I'm doing work on it because I'm getting email through it, which means your data is on my computer. And as soon as your data gets on my computer, you really have no right to it anymore unless I've signed some legal document that gives you the right to manage some of my phone. And when I leave your office, like, you can't wipe my phone. So, how are you going to get that data off my phone? Now, there are softwares out there that will divide some of these systems and allow you to manage part of them, but I've got to let you do that. And managing all that is just a nightmare. So I'm not against BYOD because I think it's impossible to get rid of it. It's like the old days trying to get rid of instant messenger. The moment you block instant messenger, another software comes out that allows you to get around it. And then people said you can't use the internet. I'm sure you remember those days, right? Early on, companies like, okay, we have internet, but only certain people can use it. Well, that doesn't live nobody would work anywhere where they can't use the internet. And that's BYOD now. Okay, if you don't let your employees do it, they're probably not going to work for you, or they're going to sneak and do it anyway. And you've got to find a way to work with it. So that means, putting in stuff that prevents your data from getting on their phone. There's certainly softwares that will do that. There's certainly softwares that will allow you to manage part of that device, so that you can also clear part of that device when those people leave. And then there's training, training people on, the security awareness stuff that has to be true. And then setting policies about what can and can't happen on a phone is also true. Again, from a liability standpoint, you're not going to stop people from doing stuff, but you can certainly limit your liability by putting those policies and training in place. So you need all that stuff. And suddenly BYOD is a little more expensive and a little more time consuming than the originally thought, perhaps.
Very true. How about, what should a small business expect to be paying for security? NASA and some of the government agencies can spend over $50 million and still get hacked. So where's the balance for, a small law firm when it comes to securing their business?
You could spend a lot on security and still not be secure, can't you? I really think that you've got to find companies that really understand security, because you can just start throwing products at it, and if you do that, that's what you're going to spend a ton of money. Now, an organization like NASA or any other big institution like that is building their own security. So they're putting in all their own stuff. They got their own team. They got to maintain that team, and it's not hard to spend $1 million. But in a small business, first of all, I would tell a small business, never try to hire a security expert to work in your firm. Why? Because within a year, they will no longer be experts, because there's not enough security stuff happening in a law firm to keep somebody interested, up and running and educated. And, it's kind of like taking a soldier and sticking them, on duty in somebody's living room, right? And there's no action.
Right.
So within a year, that guy's sitting around eating donuts, watching soap operas or whatever, because he's just bored, and he's no longer fit. He's no longer responsive. His muscle memory's gone, and you really can't count on him to do anything. So you can't hire it inside. You need to go outside. You need to have a company that can scale across many different companies so that they can have the enterprise level equipment and be able to do the monitoring and the response and all that kind of stuff across, many companies, to spread that cost of a very expensive infrastructure. And when you do that, then I come back to the home example, right? I've got my alarm in place. It wasn't that expensive to install it because it's not keeping people out. It's not iron bars on the windows and bulletproof glass. It's just a couple of cameras and some sensors on my windows and doors. And once that's in, I've contracted a company that has some very expensive equipment, right? The company monitoring your house for alarm. They've got people, 7x24, weekends, holidays, with electronic computer stuff, with video surveillance and recording. I mean, it's expensive. It's like a war room. And they're sitting there ready to dispatch, ready to get, do all that stuff. And they can scale that across many, many neighborhoods and bring your price down to a few dollars a month. And, what is that few dollars? I don't know. It's going to range in hundreds, thousands of dollars per month. But compared to building your own, it's quite cheap. And compared to a loss, it's really cheap.
Right. So just one last question, David. What should our clients be doing to stay current on security issues? Is security awareness training that we offer, is that kind of thing valuable for computer users who access sensitive information?
Yeah, there's no way for a small business to keep up to date on the threats, right? When you look at it from that standpoint, and they shouldn't. They really should be contracted with someone. I know, like, your firm is constantly reading that stuff. There's probably 7,000 new, viruses come out every single year. Some morph of some issue out there, and all kinds of scams and all that kind of stuff. So really, what they need to be up to date on is kind of the industry trends, the fact that it's happening, but even more so the handling of data. And so, for instance, you're doing user awareness training, keeping people up to date on what's going on out there. If I'm sitting there using my computer, I want to know that there are people out there right now that are sending out those fraudulent emails that I mentioned earlier. If I know that's going on, then I'm on the lookout for that. And when something comes across my desk for a wire transfer, a lot of times it might look real, and it will probably look real, and it will probably be a small enough amount that I'm not even going to take time to ask my boss, because I can't ask my boss every single time. But I should at least be aware. And let me give you an example, because stuff happens that's a little bit off, right? So I actually have two children in my home. They're grown children. They have their own businesses, and they were working independently, but it all happened in the same week, which was kind of interesting to me. They're both working on their laptops in their offices on their business, and each one of them was contacted by a pop-up from a website that said, your computer has been infected by malware. Call Apple, because they're using an Apple computer, at this number. So they both called it. No, one of them called the number. She was home. She called the number. She got on the support call with this guy, went through a few things with him, and then he said he needed a credit card because her support contract was out of date, which it is. All right. So at that point, she's ready to pay this guy, but then she's like, I just want to ask my father about this because he's a security guy. Something about this doesn't seem right. So she calls me, and she's working here in the same office building here. So I run to her place, and I'm down there, and I'm talking to her, and and she's on the phone with this guy. So I just give me the phone. I'm on the phone with the guy, and I ask him, where does he work? He's Apple, okay. And I said, okay, well, exactly what's the problem? Then I discover that he's actually in the computer. She's given him access to the computer, and we haven't paid him yet. And I said, I want to know exactly what the issue is. And he starts giving me some mumbo jumbo. And I said, dude, I'm a security guy. Okay. So give me what's really going on. I don't want the general malware, blah, blah, blah. I want to know exactly what do you see? What are you looking at? And it was pretty quick. It was like, okay, this guy is not what he's talking about. This guy's not real. And I said, do you work for Apple? And he said, and I had shut off the computer, by the way. and he said, well, we're contracted through Apple. And I said, you are not contracted through Apple. And so then we called Apple Direct, and we explained what happened. And then they walked my daughter through how to clean the system. Now my son got the same exact message. When it popped up on his screen, he knew that even if it is real, that you should never call that number, because he's heard me say this 100 times. Never call that number. Always pick up the phone and call Apple Direct. So that's what he did. Went to the Apple site, called Apple's number, said, I got the screen thing on is that really from you? They said no. And then he said, okay, well, how do I check and see if I'm infected here? They ran through a few things with him, and he was fine. So there's a simple case of user awareness where you didn't need to know too much technology. It just needed to be muscle memory. Whoop, something popped up on the screen. I'm not calling that number. I'm calling that number. And that's the level of, but it's ongoing. People get duped all the time because they're just not alert. And that's where that training really works.
All right. Very, very valuable information, David. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time, and look forward to learning more about security from you.
All right. Very good. Well, thank you.
All right. Have a good day.